The Diplomat, 10th of October 2023, China's callous reaction to the war between Israel and Hamas. On September 7, Hamas fired thousands of rockets against Israel at first light and moved armed terrorists from the Gaza Strip across the border. While the Israeli military continues to drive out the terrorists, it has reported discovering over 900 dead so far. Additionally, 130 people have been kidnapped by the Palestinian militant group, which has threatened to put them to death. Israel unleashed devastating bombs on Gaza and formally declared war in retaliation. Israel's counterattack has claimed the lives of over 670 Palestinians, and as it gets ready for a ground invasion, many more could fall. A complete siege of the region was also demanded by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who declared that no electricity, no food, and no fuel would be permitted to enter Gaza. In what way has China addressed the ongoing violence? In a press release by the Foreign Ministry on October 8, China expressed its first concerns, stating, "China is deeply concerned over the current escalation of tensions and violence between Palestine and Israel. We urge all parties involved to maintain composure, show restraint, and immediately stop hostilities to safeguard people and prevent the situation from worsening." The statement was unusual for its lack of explicit criticism. The Foreign Ministry singled out neither Israel nor Hamas. Cries to protect civilians might justifiably be directed at Hamas, which is still holding Israeli people, including the elderly and children, captive, or at Israel's continuing counterattacks, severely harming Gaza's civilian population. In her news briefing on October 9, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning went into further detail. This was, incidentally, the first scheduled press conference since China had national holidays for National Day and the Mid-Autumn Festival. But the fundamental contours of China's stance remained unchanged, a feckless appeal for common restraint and an unyielding denial of responsibility. Without mentioning the specifics of the acts, Mao declared that China was deeply saddened by the civilian casualties and oppose and condemn acts that harm civilians. China opposes moves that escalate the conflict and destabilize the region, she added. China appears to be taking the long view instead, calling for the two-state solution to be implemented and a return to peace negotiations to end the cycle of conflict between Palestine and Israel. Mao also mentioned one of China's favorite new catchphrases, stating that each party's legitimate concerns should be taken seriously. It could be helpful to compare China's answer to remarks made by UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Israel's proposal to cut off Gaza's entire population has severely concerned Guterres, who expressed his alarm, noting that the humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. However, he also vigorously denounced the Hamas strike before Israel's retaliation. "I acknowledge the rightful complaints of the Palestinian people. However, nothing can excuse these terror attacks or the murder, disfigurement, and kidnapping of people," according to Guterres. As demonstrated by Guterres' remarks, condemning both parties for breaking international law without picking a side is feasible. China is not acting in that way. China has refrained from denouncing Hamas's initial, savage attack on civilians and even declined to designate them as terrorist attacks when urged by an O Globo correspondent from Brazil. That is particularly ironic because China has previously been highly irrational when Western countries have declined to classify specific attacks by Uyghur groups as acts of terrorism. China is trying to play the perfect neutral, so it is perceived as siding with Hamas. China's demands for a ceasefire are undoubtedly perceived in Israel as an attempt to absolve the Palestinian terrorists of any responsibility for their attack on the Israeli people, even in the absence of condemnation. After successfully facilitating a breakthrough between Saudi Arabia and Iran earlier in the year, China started positioning itself as a possible mediator in the Israel-Palestine issue. Leaning further on China's historical support for Palestine in opposition to increased Israeli oppression has been a significant component of that endeavor. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of Palestine, was invited by China to Beijing in June. During the visit, China and Palestine struck a strategic partnership, promising greater collaboration and financing to the Palestinian Authority. One of China's best tools for improving its standing in the Arab world relative to the US is its support for Palestine. This geopolitical tactic forces China to refrain from criticizing Hamas directly in the current situation. It's particularly amusing since, on the surface, China and Israel appear to have a lot in common. They are both highly developed security governments that expend a great deal of energy and money on suppressing and regulating a Muslim population that is viewed as a threat to national security. However, Geopolitics can lead to peculiar pairings. China believes there is no gain in siding with Israel in the current dispute, given that Israel is a steadfast partner of the United States. Beijing would be better off using its position as a supporter of the Palestinian cause to its advantage.